and welcome. This is Riga Security Forum 2022 series episode 1. And as usual, our first conversation we have with the President, Egils Levits. Hello. And the central topic today is we are going to talk about what is important, maybe the most important this year, regarding how internationally to maintain multilateralism and relationships and the rule of law. How to ensure that the rule of law, which at least for 70 years has been the leading motive in international relationships, institutions and principles, how to continue and not allow internal and external forces to dismantle it. And this is also my first question to you. What do you believe is the most obvious danger to the international system to change to adverse model of the 19th century or imperial model which has existed for many, many years before? In 1945, the United Nations established a new world order, world peace order, based on international law. This is a long-term interest of all countries, because international law is what ensures peace and compliance with international law, and that ensures peace. And to ensure peace is the primary and highest priority of the global world order. So far, it has been successfully secured since 1945 for more than 70 years. There has only been one precedent when this peace order was disrupted, was Kuwait. It is Iraq's invasion in Kuwait and annexation. But then the United States of America and more than 50 countries organized together the release of Kuwait. And not because these countries were close to Kuwait, but because previously it has been the first attack on international law and order. And current Russia's aggression against Ukraine, in the same way as Iraq 30 years ago was aggressive towards Kuwait, it's not a territorial conflict between two countries, because we see the aims, clearly we see them. This is to annex. It is the annexation and destroying of the country. And since World War II there has been territorial disputes, but this is qualitatively something different, and for the first time on such scope, Russia, with their attack on Ukraine, has attacked at the same time international law and order. And this is proven by the reaction of the world countries. In the United Nations, the clear majority condemns aggression, this aggression, and the last resolution, when 143 countries out of 190 condemned Russia's aggression. And Russia has only 4 or 5 friends. It is Russia itself, North Korea, Eritrea, Syria, and this shows the isolation of Russia. But on the other hand, it also shows that the clear majority of the world countries are in favor of world peace based on international law. But talking about annexation, Russia has done this also previously: Crimea, Georgia, Ossetia, regions, just practically they did this, and this is not a new principle. Current Russia's behavior has the unacceptability level been raised because it said that the Ukraine has to change its sovereign regime. Well, it's qualitatively new aggression of Russia. In 2008, Russia's aggression started against Georgia, but there has not been a moment of annexation. And if you really want to, you can actually interpret it as a regional conflict. Then, in 2014, Crimea, the world society, the community of the world reacted weakly. There have been just some sanctions against Russia. And this is why in 2022 Russia started full-scale aggression against Ukraine to destroy the democratic state of Ukraine. And this is the precedent, the only such kind of precedent previously occurred in Kuwait, and what differentiates it from other military conflicts. And this is why the reaction has been so strong, so rigid. It has been politically, it had condemned these actions and also later the consequences. Maybe slightly provocative, we're talking about, so we are doing as a sovereign state whatever we want also against our neighboring country. But at the same time, at the end of September, they are organizing also the polls, voting, referendums. So it means that the international law has become the principle of everyday life, so you go so far as to organize a referendum just to show that as if we are complying with the law. On one hand, yes, international law has been very deeply incorporated in the notion of the world society. So, exactly today, no one, including Russia, verbally does not challenge, but they want to circumvent the international law. And this old trick with referendum, we know it from July 1940, when the election was organized, the voting was organized to introduce the Soviet rule. But before that, I think it was Hitler in 1938 who invaded military Austria, and in just several days, they organized the election, and 99% voted for joining, in favor of joining Germany. And then 2 years later, the same, with the example of Hitler, was done in the Baltic states. So I must say that such pseudo-voting does not have an impact on international law. Any impact. It doesn't leave any impact, because you cannot circumvent international law. Like Czechoslovakia to join Karlovice, Königsberg, Kaliningrad. This was a joke, of course, but it showed the way it could have been done to laugh at the referendum organized by Russia. And of course it doesn't have any consequences, and nobody is acknowledging it, admitting it. Returning to the international law, and there, factually making sure that they are being observed. From the law, we know there is a regulation, but another thing is its implementation and the mechanisms. And in international law, it has always been a challenge. There is sovereign, anarchic system, and well, the systems need to agree in what kind of world order and community we want to live. So today, what do you believe are the tools that help to international law and order of the law to ensure it? Implementation and compliance with international law in international relationships, the mechanism is weaker than nationally. Nationally, we have law enforcement, the police, various institutions, courts that penalize the criminals and the activities that are against the law, illegal, but mostly. So, thus, the argument, one argument for with international laws is that internationally we do not have law enforcement as it is nationally, so there is no significance of this international law. I would say it's incorrect argument because mostly we do comply with international law, and also nationally we do have criminals that are never caught, and if it is the case, we never say that we do not need the police. So international law is weaker, the instruments are weaker, but nevertheless, they exist. And they exist in a way that the reaction of the rest of the world and other countries is condemning at first, verbally, but then there are other instruments of impact, for example, with trade sanctions against citizens of a particular state, isolation of that state, and also in specific cases also military campaigns. So also we'll remind you once again about Kuwait. There has been invasion, annexation, and it caused international military reaction against Iraq. And at that time, this reaction then meant renewal of independence of Kuwait 6 months later. But of course, such campaigns need alliances and agreements, and anyways, currently the international law, I have to say clearly, world international peace order is now substituted by Ukraine and their activities. They are fighting for international peace. They are fighting for international law and rules. And us, all the other countries that acknowledge the international law, we need to help Ukrainians as much as we can in this fight. And the Ukrainians are, of course, fighting also for the territorial integrity of their own country, but at the same time they're fighting for Latvia, Latvians, Europe, and the world. And this is why there's such reaction from other countries. The United States of America provide military aid, very large one. Latvia is in the first place in the world, helping in their help to Ukraine against their GDP. It's 0.9% of GDP this year we have provided to Ukraine, and large part of it has been military. On the second place there's Estonia, then Poland, Lithuania, and other countries. But it is the reaction to ensure long-term international law existence. And also, international law is protected differently by, for example, not admitting annexation. And we, the citizens of the Baltic states, are the best example. For 50 years Latvia has been annexed, but the Western countries did not acknowledge it as a Soviet territory. They never admitted it, and this is why it provided us with some kind of a... It was sort of like the basis on which we could base our argumentation in the world. And we knew that it was not forever. And this is why the countries are striving for gaining or regaining independence, and this is how we ensure international law long term. Being a political scientist, I sometimes think in the 60s it was also mentioned that the police of the world, the definition, but currently the international law, not to diminish Ukrainian successes and their significance now, but the United States of America, when the World War II ended, the first 10 years after the World War II, this is the time when international law and international trade principles and UN was founded. And it is an unprecedented time, and when it is said that you tie us all together with these tools. And then there is a story about, in the 90s, the police of the world, the policemen of the world, that cannot anymore afford this. And then there is example with Syria, when during Trump administration, and it was Trump administration, the exploitation of chemical weapons, well, it showed that the United States of America has some limits because it reacted, and also Gaddafi's threats, and find everything, destroy everything that was evidential of genocide, and now nuclear weapons. The United States of America has said, officially or not officially, they have claimed that if Russia uses them, the United States is threatening with or telling that it will react accordingly. Well, don't we still believe that the United States is the policeman in the international law for continuation of such world order? In order to ensure compliance with international law, there are many forces: economic forces, political forces, soft power also, like attraction, but also military force. And about this attractiveness, I would like to say that the Western freedom and way of life is attractive to the world outside of the West. There are many people who would like to live as the people do in the West, but the regime they live in currently does not allow for it. So there is a division of authoritarian states and of democratic states. And it is difficult for us in Latvia to imagine, or in another Western country, that, for example, North Korea is attractive, and people would say, well, let us introduce a regime as it is in North Korea. So, soft power, that is very important. Also, during the Cold War, there were very few people who wanted to have the regime as in the East, but they wanted it as in the West. But returning to the military, also, international law is not something abstract. It doesn't work on it by itself. There has to be the states that support this, and they also use their power, economic, soft power, and also military. And in this case, the United States of America, as a country, democratic country with their values, they believe that it is their moral responsibility to defend the international law and peace, also with military interventions where it was possible. And even better, the biggest power, the most efficient power is the one which you do not use. So it's not like threats, but the authority as such. So avoiding conflicts by imposing some authority. And for the first 3 to 5 years since World War II, during the period of the Cold War, so-called, when the US led the Western Bloc, which ensured peace for 35 years, apart from some isolated military conflicts in third world countries where the Soviet Union wanted to also expand their sphere of influence, not always successfully though. After the Cold War, the situation has changed, the world has changed, the US is the most powerful country in the world in all spheres, economically, politically, military, but it is not the only one. It has been in the 90s. It has to compete with, especially China. So with Russia, of course, Russia, if you just take one against the other, then economically and military Russia cannot compare with the United States, but Russia has nuclear weapon, and this balances out the potential of nuclear potential. So a similar mechanism here is in place as during Cold War. And in NATO concept, it is deterrence through credible defense. So it's a credible military potential. It means that, for example, Biden 2-3 weeks ago said clearly that in case Russia uses nuclear weapons in Ukraine, then it will have catastrophic consequences to Russia. And this is a very serious statement and reflection of the doctrine to deter Russia from using nuclear weapon. If Russia knows that it loses by using nuclear weapon first, and it is also not, it is not said directly what kind of consequences there will be, but that there will be consequences. This is psychological deterrence. If you're not attacking the other one, the other country, because you know that you are going to lose then. This is the Cold War logics. It has returned today. From the international law, talking about the tools, and now heading towards the second part of our conversation, which is multilateral diplomacy organizations, multilateral organizations. In this case, they symbolize, not only symbolize, but they are also the directors of some ideas. And for each idea, there needs to be a leader, and the international organizations like NATO with defense, or European Union, which is related to values of Europe, and UN for peace and prosperity. These all organizations have their own objectives. But over the last 10 years, we have seen that there were attempts to challenge them. Because for tens of years we're talking about the UN and its necessity. If it cannot stop, in a way, a conflict, military conflict. So the central question then is the threats to such organizations like the UN, internally and externally. Externally, it is specific countries. We're talking about China, we're talking about Russia, who want to have these organizations to rule over them, or impose their own opinions and order. And then there is this credibility to multilateralism and cooperation. It is challenged very often and disputed. What do you believe is the most dangerous, internal or external factors? Is it internally in the European Union or the UN capacity disputing? Maybe it is even more serious threat. I would divide two different things, the UN and the... first of all, the UN is, in the history of humanity, it has been a tremendously large step in the direction of progress. There has been none such global organization for thousands or for hundreds of years, unifying all the countries of the world. And the fact that there is a forum for people to come together once a year, bilaterally, multilaterally, as such, in our history of 2,000 or 3,000 years, it is a progress, very large progress. But what is the problem? The problem is that we expect from such global organization too much. We need to look at step-by-step strengthening of international law and cooperation. However, we cannot expect, because it is very different, 190 countries, we cannot solve all the issues. It is not perfect, but it is the order nonetheless, because otherwise it would be military anarchy. Everybody could attack anyone, but in the 20th century it has changed. And that is why, looking into a broader perspective, it is big progress. And again, let us not expect too much from the UN. This is what I can say about it. But anyways, there are opportunities to have a dialogue, to have conversation, and also in regional conflicts, the UN with peacekeeping missions, they do reduce the conflicts, and sometimes they even mitigate them altogether. But the European Union, we have to historically look at a longer period of time. The dominance of Europe now is disappearing, and the European Union needs to find its place in the global competition of power and the balance of power, both political, military, and especially economical. European Union, and in the European Union, just above 5% of people of the world live. But the European Union probably produces 20 or slightly more, 20% of all the international power, and this percentage now is decreasing. We see the decrease of Europe's influence in the world, for example, looking back at 1950s after the war, and in 2000s, and in 2022 we see that this is decreasing the impact. But European Union is not just economical union, it is the union of values. And it is a political union. And the values, it means that we have our own way of life. And the European Commission, von der Leyen, there is a commissioner now of European way of life. If we want to safeguard and keep these values, democracy, rule of law, freedom, then we need to make sure that in this world, which does not divide our values, We need to be strong in a sufficient way in a global competition of the world. And this is why we need strong European Union, which is capable to react politically to challenges and to challenges also internally. And this is why the Euroscepticism is a threat, is very dangerous, because it can lead to all European Union member states and nations weakening of the situation. Us Latvians would find ourselves in a more difficult, in a worse situation if we had not joined 18 years ago European Union and NATO. Now we can compare very well. What if? So it is in the interest of all the nations to strengthen this union, and the Euroscepticism is destructive. We have, with arguments, we have to fight against it. Well, we are heading towards the end of the conversation. Academically, provocatively, I would like to ask you the last question. I wanted to talk about European Union and the UN, and the European Union also has sometimes more capacity than the UN, and it has showed readiness to share instruments, but the resources is a unique situation that European Union, part of its budget comes from tariffs, customs tariffs coming from the other countries, non-member states. But the UN, of course, we cannot have tariffs there. But I told the students that I am ready to pay 1% of my income additionally if it goes to the UN, for one reason only, because the UN is the organization that keeps the idea that the world can be made better. This is what you were speaking about. And this is the last question, and maybe briefly, if you or do you see that the people who believe in international law and multilateral diplomacy, with their taxes, with their resources, could they support NATO? In reality, unfortunately, probably not. The United Nations indeed unite all countries with different perceptions and attitudes, but at least they can agree on the fact that there is international law which has to be secured. It's not 1%, it's very little percent is necessary, but income of the United Nations could be increased by the payments of the states, contributions of the states. But in case of Russia, this is international tribunal which is being discussed, and which could then review the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. We have International Criminal Court and Court in Hague that currently is already working on particular aspects of the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. But aggression as such, attack on another country, is not under the jurisdiction of this court. This is why maybe we need ad hoc tribunal to assess the scope and this aggression as such. And the ministers of foreign affairs of the Baltic states have jointly agreed on a message, and we have seen support from other states. It's not necessary for all the United Nations doing this, but such tribunal need to be organized by the majority or many countries. And now it is also incorrect to say that these dictators or rulers of Russia, we would then forcefully take them to court. It is not necessary, actually. We need a legal evaluation for the most for the worst possible offense. Thank you. We have. I indeed now am thinking about the speed of the UN, of the European Union. We have been talking about it. Maybe this is now the potential for the UN and for multilateral organizations and to secure and ensure international law. Thank you very much, Mr. Levits, for the conversation. I will remind, this is episode 1 of Riga Security Forum 2022 series organized by the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. And you will see very soon, and we'll see you in episode 2. Mr. Levits, thank you very much. Organized by the Latvian Institute of International Affairs.